We have Cincinnati's very own Ben Hammer on the keys.
Flash your light, you must be shining. I think I see you across the sky, you must be flying. Hey. And I think you're getting closer, filling up my line of sight. And it only takes a moment. I'm asking you to come inside. Got me going out of my mind, but I never did feel so fine. Throwing bridges into space and time. Don't know where I'm going, but I keep on floating. Got me going out of my mind, but I never did feel so fine. Throwing bridges into space and time. Don't know where I'm going. time. I don't know where I'm going, but I keep on floating. But I never did feel so fine. Through adventures into space and time. Don't know where I'm going, but I keep on floating. So fine, there were adventures into space and time. I don't know where I'm going, but I keep on floating. Got me going out of my mind, but I never did feel so fine. There were adventures into space and time. Don't know where I'm going, but I keep on floating. Space and time, two things, man. Or are they the same thing? We don't know yet. But we do know that this next song is called... That's it. Thank you, everybody.
first album, I think, right? It's on there somewhere. It's an album called Greatest Hits. We wanted to come out of the gate strong. Thank you, everybody. Yellow pages? We are not in the yellow pages. Back pages, front pages.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Science on Tap. Thanks for joining us tonight. I normally come up here and introduce our special guests, and tonight I'm really excited to introduce a very special guest. Bob and I met back in 2017 when we were two of the organizers for the March for Science Cincinnati, the first and the second one, and we've been doing a lot of science outreach and advocacy as well as creating other good trouble since then. So I'm really happy to bring Bob Hermann to the stage to talk about Tanzania.
Good evening. Oh, I can say that better. I am wearing a traditional Tanzanian garment. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, Jumbo Jumbo. Can you say that? Jumbo Jumbo? That is hello. And Caribou. Caribou? Caribou is welcome. So you've learned your first two words in Swahili. Don and I had the opportunity to visit Tanzania in February. Tanzania, use the pointer here. There's Tanzania. Tanzania is a large country. It's in East Africa. It borders on the Indian Ocean. It's a third larger than Texas. They have a population of like 36 million people. We were in northern Tanzania, and we were about 3 degrees below the equator. So along the coast, it is quite tropical. And here's Tanzania up close. So we went to 4 different parks. Arusha, oh, I got the pole in the way. Arusha, Tarangire, Ngorongoro, and the Serengeti. And to do that, and there are wild dogs in Tanzania as well. To do that, we traveled in these Toyota Land Cruisers, and you can see that they have a pop-up top so that when you're driving along and you see animals, you can stand up and to get pictures. They're very substantial vehicles. We were actually on a Smithsonian Journeys tour. There were 14 of us in the group, and we were in 3 different vehicles. And the people that kept us in tow while we were on the trip, on our left was Emmanuel, who was our tour director, who is from Tanzania. And on the right is Grant Nell, who was the naturalist who was assigned to us. Both of those individuals were extremely knowledgeable about everything about the country and the wildlife and everything about it, and really provided an extra level of understanding of everything about our trip. And also 2 very wonderful people. Really enjoyed being with them. So we started our first national park was Arusha National Park. It's fairly small, but has a lot of interesting wildlife in it. Here on the left, you see Mount Meru. That is the second highest peak in Tanzania. It's over 13,000 feet, only second to Mount Kilimanjaro, which is over 15,000. The Arusha National Park is right at the base of Mount Meru. And here's some of the special wildlife that are included in Arusha. So here are the black and white colobus monkeys. They work as a troop. They are driven by a male patriarch, which is more rare for most of the species we're going to see today. And they spend almost all of their time in the trees. They very rarely drop down. And Arusha, while it has some open savanna, is much more wooded than any of the other parks we went to. Lots of dense underbrush and a lot of trees. And also special to Arusha are the blue monkeys, and you can see on the backs they have this blue coloration. And they normally spend most of their time in trees. They are, however, driven by a matriarchy, so they switch that around. And these shots, they were actually down on the ground, but apparently that's pretty rare. They mostly spend their time in the trees as well. Here are the lovely warthogs. They're in all the parks. They can grow some pretty sizable tusks like a wild boar. But they graze and they hang out all over the place. And you can see on the right-hand side, they found a nice mud hole, and just like a good hog, we're rolling around in there and having a good time. And then here's the serval cat. So here's the story on that. You probably read in the news about 3 months ago now that some fool was keeping a serval cat as a pet that got loose in Oakley. And fortunately, the Cincinnati Zoo got the animal, and it's doing very well. So, we traveled, almost halfway around the world so that we could see a serval cat. They are actually quite rare to be spotted. They mostly only come out at night, and they usually stay in the thick underbrush. Donna actually spotted the cat, so we were able to see that. A couple of our drivers said they hadn't seen a serval cat in several years, so it was really nice to be able to see one. So the next park we went to was Tarangire, not too many miles away. And here's some of the typical landscape. So on the left, you see almost a completely dry riverbed. That's where the Tarangire River flows. There is actually a little bit of water that traverses the river 12 months out of the year, even in the dry season. And we were there at the end of the dry season. But when the rains come, that whole area is completely filled up. They get a tremendous amount of rain. And on the right-hand side, you kind of see some of the typical scenery there. Those are acacia trees. There are over 60 different species of acacia there. So while there was much more savanna than like in Arusha, there were still quite a few trees. So you saw a lot of acacias and others. So when we first got into the park, the first thing we encountered was a big herd of zebra, beautiful animals. And it was thought for a long time that the zebra stripes were actually some kind of camouflage against the predators. But in the last couple years or so, that theory appears to have been disproven. When predators are maybe only about 150 feet away from them or so, the stripes are meaningless to them. So we actually, at this point, don't know really why they have stripes. The other interesting tidbit, just sort of like your fingerprints, no zebra has the same kind of striping pattern. They are all unique. So the baobab trees were also very much prevalent in Tarangire. On the left, you see a baobab tree that was planted at our lodge property. That tree was planted in 1995. It's about 9.5 feet tall. Here on the right, you see a mature baobab tree. they can live for 2,000 years. They're very impressive specimens. And of course, we saw a lot of giraffes, very majestic animals. You would think that because they're so big and when they're close by and they're munching on all these leaves, they make a lot of noise. They are like completely silent. They just kind of move along and you don't even know they're there, until you are up on top of them. But really, really interesting animals to observe. And termite mounds. So you've probably seen these before on, National Geographic specials or whatever. These very large termite mounds, they are dotted all over the area. They're very important to the ecology of the area. The termites actually work only on dead and decaying trees, so they are recycling all of the plant material naturally. Here we see impala, a lot of impala there. That's a male impala on the left, and that is his harem on the right. So a male impala will have a number of females and then his offspring that he tries to keep in tow and is, constantly being challenged by other male impalas who are trying to run him off. But that's how they work. And here are the little dik-diks. These are the cutest animals in all of Africa. They are the smallest of the antelope species. They only weigh like 5 pounds or something. Really tiny little things, and they scurry about. I guess that was in Serengeti, we actually had a couple of them grazing right outside the room where we were. They're really, really adorable little animals. On the other hand, there are the Cape buffalo, which are big and mean. They are really sizable, and they are not particularly friendly, but they're amazing to view. And we saw several times, but this particular case in Tanzania was a very large herd. I don't know, there were 150, 200 buffalo at the time. And baboons. Baboons are everywhere. I kind of liken them to raccoons here because they're kind of ubiquitous and they're always into mischief. They get into everything. But obviously here on the right, here's a female with a very brand new baby. And I think it was probably dad there pictured in the left. And birds. So you go to Africa and you want to see lions and leopards and cheetahs, and when you're thinking about all these big animals, but there's a tremendous number of bird species in Tanzania. They have over 4,000 species of birds. And here obviously is the big land bird, the ostrich. These are all males who are very colorful. The females have very more drab brown. It's kind of hard to see. Here, but that guy is flapping his wings, trying to show off to a female. And some of the other bird species, so the red-billed hornbill and the long-crested eagle. Let me move this over a little bit. There we go. A lot of raptors in Tanzania. Big raptors, eagles, hawks. On the left is a superb starling, which is much more colorful than the starlings we have around here. Really pretty, and the common sandpiper. But you go to Tarangire to see elephants. In the mid-19th century, it was estimated that there were over 27 million elephants in Africa. Today, there are less than 500,000. In Tarangire, there are over 3,000, and we were able to see a lot of elephants there. They are amazing animals. I could have watched them all day long. They're really, really wonderful. It's fortunate that we were told that now the ivory trade has really plummeted, and so the poaching of elephants has really dramatically dropped. So it appears that the elephant populations are at least stabilizing at this point. And here you see the tusks on this elephant. This one is shorter than that one. That means that that elephant is right-tusked. When they go about looking for vegetation and digging off branches and rubbing on trees, they always favor one tusk or the other. And so one tusk usually is always shorter than the other. And I should say, while often, we would see animals out in the distance, it was not uncommon at all for the animals to get very, very close to us. The zebras and lions, and especially the elephants. So we would come upon a herd like this of elephants, and they might be on the left side of the road grazing and decided that they wanted to get onto the right side of the road, and they would just move across and just walk around our vehicles and could care less that we were there. They know at this point that those vehicles are not a threat to them, so they just go about their daily business. And often we had animals within 15 feet of us. And here we see some youngsters. So on the left is a brand new baby, only about 3 weeks old, and obviously the young calf on the right is nursing. So I have like 3 words to describe the elephants: majestic, curious, and content. They're obviously magnificent, not just their sheer size, but when you encounter them, their presence, you really feel their presence around you, especially when you've got a herd of 2 or 3 dozen at a time. And curious as well. Obviously, elephants are extremely intelligent. While they're not bothered or intimidated by seeing us, certainly when I'm looking at them, they're looking back at me as well. And I would say content also, because they seem to be completely at peace. They have plenty of food, they have plenty of water. They're moving through the savannas unobstructed the way they want to. They're under no stress. They're very peaceful. Here's some nighttime shots, and you can't quite see, but we were there when Jupiter and Venus were in conjunction. So that was nice. And then here's some other landscapes. So we were there like the last 2 weeks of February, which was right at the end of the rainy season. But on several days, late afternoon, there would be that late afternoon big shower. And I took these shots right around 5:30, getting close to sunset after a rain shower. And you can see, how the landscape changed with the setting sun. So next we went to Ngorongoro Crater. you can see here, it is called a conservation area and not a national park. So national parks only have wildlife. The conservation area, in addition to wildlife, can have humans. And in this case, the humans are Maasai tribespeople. And there's a sizable population in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. I mentioned baboons earlier. When we first started to pull into this area, there were, a troop of maybe 50 baboons or more, all milling around and jumping around and whatever. And what we learned and were warned is that unfortunately people in the past had fed the baboons, and now they know that humans can be a good source for food, so they can become quite aggressive. And we were told that they're smart enough now that they know how to unlock the vehicle doors, and they will not only steal your food, but anything that's lying around, even your camera. So you had to be careful. We did not have any problems with them, fortunately. So here's the shot of Ngorongoro Crater. So Ngorongoro Crater actually isn't a crater. It's actually a caldera. It's touted as the largest caldera in the world. It's 19 miles long, 10 miles across. This shot is from the crest of the crater at 7,600 feet, and the base of the crater is at 6,000 feet. So we went on a very long game drive that day to go down into the crater and explore all the wildlife. And so we started out before the sun came up. And there you can see as the sun is starting to rise. And that's how the crater looks when you're at the bottom. And there are thousands of animals, multiple species, that exist on the crater floor. So the advantage of getting an early start is that we immediately got to see some lions after a kill. And we ended up seeing a lot of lions on this trip. So you can see here, he's doing a little munching. It was probably a wildebeest that they got a couple hours earlier. And the one lion scratching under the chin. And here's a couple more shots of them. A fairly small pride. I think there were only about a dozen of them. And here we do actually see a male lion with the pride. So contrary to the Lion King, the male lion is not only not the king of the jungle, he's not even the head of the lions. The females run the show. Males will come around at times to help hunt, and they will come around to procreate, but after that, the female lions don't really want to have anything to do with them. They go off on their own and try to fend for themselves. We came across a couple male lions when we were in Serengeti in a dry riverbed, and I really felt kind of sorry for them. They looked a bit haggard. They looked like they needed a meal. They weren't doing great. Their life expectancy is half of the females. Females can tend to live 20 years. The males only make it about 10. And a male will come and go from one pride to another. They don't, stay with the same pride all the time. Next are the spotted hyenas, which are, very unusual shaped beasts. Should talk about the predatory hierarchy. So lions are at the top of the predatory chain. Next are the hyenas, who are very fierce. Third are the leopards, and at the bottom are the cheetahs, and we'll talk more about the leopards and cheetahs later. But the lions and the hyenas obviously most often hunt as a group and a well-coordinated group. They can do things individually. Hyenas will also scavenge for food and steal from other predators. Here's a jackal, another small predator. That's about the size of a fox. They'll go after rodents and maybe a snake, and I think they're also omnivores. They'll graze as well. These are Thompson gazelles. You see on the left a couple juveniles are playing and kind of going after each other. And you see a female gazelle with her young. So at this time of year in February, especially all the herd animals, impalas, gazelles, wildebeest, zebras, all tend to have their young at the same time, and they do that for safety in numbers against the predators. We did see a black rhinoceros. Now, the black rhinoceros is extremely endangered. There are only about 6,000 left in Africa total. There are only 20 in Ngorongoro. So we were very fortunate to see one. As I said, while the ivory trade has plummeted relative to elephants, the same is not true for rhino horn. There's still a tremendous threat of poaching going on. So it's going to be very dicey for the rhino to survive, unfortunately. And then here are the wildebeests. Unusual faces, but they're everywhere. And we'll talk a little bit more later about the Great Migration, kind of one of the reasons we were there. But the wildebeests are the drivers of the Great Migration through Tanzania and Kenya. And more birds. So on the left is the gray crowned crane. That is the national bird of Tanzania. It's the size of a pheasant or maybe even a little bit bigger. There's a Cory bustard. And then this was the first hippopotamus that we saw. And you may not be able to make it out here on the big screen, but there are a lot of scar and striations on the back of this hippo. And that could be due to a couple things. One, hippos do get into fights. They challenge each other, and they have very big tusks, and they can do damage. But another possible cause is sunburn. The skin on the hippo is very, very sensitive. And normally, they spend all their time during the daytime in water and trying to wallow in mud to keep their skin protected. And then usually they only come out at night, and that's when they come out to graze. Additionally, hippos are the greatest cause of death to humans in Africa, of mammals. They are very tough beasts to deal with, and if they're out of the water, they can chase you down. You cannot outrun a hippo. Usually these deaths are occurring with native villagers who have their villages close to the rivers or whatever, and then they encounter a hippo, or they encounter a mom with a calf, and she goes after them. That's what happens a lot. A couple more landscape scenes. This is sunset over the crater. And then this is the following morning at another sunrise. So really pretty landscape there. So we had the great opportunity to visit a Maasai village, and this was their welcome. So that was only a little over 3 minutes. I've told that when they have big festivals, they may dance continuously for 2 or 3 days like that. What I didn't include were any of the photos of us dancing with them. A little too embarrassed to include those. But they were absolutely delightful people. The Maasai are one of the few tribes in Africa that still cling to their traditional way of life. They are semi-nomadic herders. They herd cattle, goats, and some sheep. And they have a village there where they'll stay there for about 6 months, and then they'll move their herds to other grazing areas, and they will stay there, for another 6 months. You see their traditional clothing, and that's what I'm wearing here. Typically, most of the men tend to wear red and the women tend to wear blue. The garment I have is actually the colors of the Tanzanian flag. This is their one compromise to modernity, because they do go to the village to buy these fabrics. Up until the 1960s, they all wore animal skins at that point. So if anybody was a Boy Scout or knew about Boy Scouts or whatever, one of the things they're supposed to do is to be able to start a fire with 2 sticks and the like. These guys are really good. It took them less than 3 minutes to get a big fire going. They did that demonstration. They were excellent. And here's their village. So they have all these individual mud huts, and then they have this natural fencing, which is all acacia. The acacia trees have extremely long thorns, really nasty. And so they will create this natural fencing and then keep their herds inside the fencing at night to keep out the lions and the leopards. And here was the individual, Nina, who invited Donna and I into his hut to see it. Just a delightful man. So the hut's quite small, a small door opening to get in, kind of sideways in. He and his wife and his 2 boys live in there. They have a small hole in the side of the wall that allows some light in and also allows for some smoke to escape, because they will even cook inside the hut. You can see there on the wall that is all mud there. So they take, big branches, lots of big leaves, and then the mud to create these huts. And we're told that these huts will last for 10 years. They're that well constructed. And lastly, in the village, we went to a little preschool. These were all very little kids already in school, very cute. And this was before they're going on to formal school. And they were actually learning English. I should say that their two main languages in Tanzania are Swahili and English. So many people speak both. So from the Maasai village, we went on to the Oludvai Gorge. So the Oludvai Gorge is where Mary and Louis Leakey had numerous discoveries of our early ancestors and all the animals that lived in those times millions of years ago. So this is maybe 250 feet of sediment broken away, and that exposes rock to almost 4 million years broken away. Now, there's controversy. You've all learned that this is Oludvai Gorge. Well, that's actually the wrong name. It's really supposed to be Oludpai, which is a Maasai word, which means Valley of the Sisal. And that's the sisal plant. It's a succulent that grows throughout the area. So in 1918, there was a German biologist who was in the area studying butterflies. And he went to the Maasai and he said, what this area is called? And they said, oh, it's Oludpai. And he wrote it down as Oludvai. And then in 1922, his butterflies were on exhibit in Berlin. Louis Leakey happened to see the exhibit. He wrote it down as Oludvai, and we've been calling it Oludvai ever since. So a brief history of our family tree. Here are a cousin of ours, Paranthropus, which Mary Leakey discovered. And over here are our Australopithecine cousins. And then here is our Homo line, Homo habilis, which Mary Leakey also discovered. And, it goes up the tree to our Neanderthals and Homo erectus and us here. So back, the Leakeys were actually visiting Oludvai Gorge as early as the 1930s, but they didn't stay there very long, on and off. They were doing other digs in other places. It wasn't until the late 50s and early 60s that they really did some serious work there and had some major discoveries. And back then, even today, but back then, there was scant fossil evidence of our ancestors. And we're dealing with, a jawbone or part of a femur, very, very small specimens. And so there was lots of controversy as to what our family tree was, or was it even a tree? If you're old enough as I am, I think you were probably taught that we had like a linear family tree, and here were the great apes, and then all of a sudden, we showed up down here on a linear line. And of course, that's not the case. It is very much a tree. It branches in a lot of different areas. But Louis Leakey, whenever he would find a specimen, he would immediately declare that it was a brand new species, as opposed to maybe just another Australopithecine. And he did that because he was also a great fundraiser. And if it sounded a lot better if he could say, I found a new species, as opposed to I found another of a species already discovered. His declarations of new species played really well with the National Geographic Society in keeping them funded. But let's see. So Oludvai Gorge is in the East African Rift Valley. The whole Rift Valley actually runs all the way from Lebanon all the way down to Mozambique. But the main part of the Rift Valley is from Ethiopia to the southern end of Tanzania. And what is happening, there's tectonic forces going on where there are plates here that are breaking away from the main continent of Africa. And so that is what is creating the rift. That is what is exposing all these sediments so that all these fossils can be discovered. So it is also a very arid area at this point, so there's good preservation of fossils. So there certainly are probably other places in Africa where we hit some of our earlier ancestors, but the conditions are not ripe for preserving the fossils. But very important fossils were found. So Paranthropus, which was discovered by Mary Leakey, let's see, that was in 1959, and he was about 2 million years old. And then also she discovered in the early 60s Homo habilis, which is kind of decided on at this point as maybe one of the first actual Homo specimens. And that was also about 2 million years old, but a little bit younger. And then when you go further north into Kenya, you see Turkana boy, which is actually Homo erectus about 1.5 million years ago. And that was discovered by Richard Leakey, who was the son of Lewis and Mary. And all the way up here into Ethiopia is where was discovered the famous Lucy specimen, which had, the majority of the skeleton preserved. And she was an Australopithecus afarensis, dated to 3.2 million years ago. That was discovered by Don Johansen, who at the time was professor at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. And then lastly, when we go back down the Rift Valley to Laetoli, Mary Leakey also discovered the famous ancient footprints. So these are dated to 3.5 million years ago and are also believed to be Australopithecus afarensis. There was volcanic ash laid down. It was wet. A group of Australopithecines walked through the volcanic ash, leaving footprints, and then additional volcanic ash came down to fill in the footprints and preserve them until later there was erosion and they were exposed again. And here's, again, this is a specimen that Mary Leakey discovered, Paranthropus bosai, which is a side branch of our family tree. At Oludvai Gorge, there's a tremendous museum showing lots of original tools from all the different ages. They have a lot of cast recreations of the various specimens like Turkana boy and Homo habilis, but most of those original specimens are actually being housed at the National Museum of Tanzania in Dar es Salaam. But that skull is the actual original from, what is he? He's over 2 million years old too, is he not? Yeah, he's about 2.2 million years ago, and that is the actual skull. And a final thought about Oludvai Gorge, you see that, today it's very arid. 3.5 million years ago or so, this area was lush. It was very much a woodland. There was some savanna. So the Australopithecines had a very lush environment with lots of water, etc. When Homo erectus comes around at 1.5+ million years ago, it's becoming much more savanna, a lot like what we saw at Tarangire. But then when Homo sapiens come along around 300,000 plus years ago, it's becoming much more arid, not quite as arid as it is today, but much more arid. And so that was a climate impetus for our earliest Homo sapien ancestors to move to other parts of Africa and ultimately to leave Africa, go into the Near East, and ultimately populate the rest of the world. So while there may be some other places in Africa where there are early hominid specimens, certainly the Oludvai Gorge and the Rift Valley, not only from the fossil evidence, but from genetic evidence, certainly shows that this is the cradle of mankind, and we are, in fact, all Africans. So the last park we went to was Serengeti. That name has been adapted by Europeans. The actual Maasai name is Serengeti, and Serengeti means endless plain. And it certainly is that. It goes on and on and on forever. I forget now how many square miles, it escapes me, but it's huge. And so that gets us to the Great Migration. So we were there in February when all of the young are being born, the end of that dry season. There is another dry season at the end of August, and that's what maybe you have seen, on nature specials, when the wildebeest are trying to cross the river and the crocodiles are going after them and the like. There is no beginning and end to the migration. The migration is continuous, 12 months out of the year. They will travel about 2,500 miles in the year, going clockwise from the southern Serengeti to the north, cross over into Kenya, into the Maasai Mara, and then loop all the way back around and start all over again. It is predominantly wildebeest, but it is led by the zebras. And so we could drive a couple hours out in the plains and not see one wildebeest or one zebra, and then all of a sudden you would come across just thousands of them, and all these little dots out here, that's all wildebeest out in there. They're just everywhere. And so the big herds, they just congregate, and then they just keep moving and keep grazing and keep grazing and keep moving. So cheetahs, when we first got into the park, 15, 20 minutes, all of a sudden our driver starts driving off-road. And I should talk about the roads for a minute. There are no paved roads in any of these parks. It's all rutted dirt roads. Gives you a fairly good bumpy ride. And all of a sudden, he's off-road. We're in some underbrush. There's some wetland he's driving through, and he would go in one direction, and then he'd come back in another, and he kept kind of trying to triangulate in one way or the other. And all the different drivers, not just with our group, but with the other groups, they all have radios, and they communicate to one another if they see something special or the like. And he was doing this crisscrossing, for maybe 30 minutes. And eventually, this is what we came upon. Earlier in the day, some drivers said, oh, here's some cheetahs. And he was working, trying to find where these were. And here they are. So this is Mom. And those are her two almost now fully adult sons, just grazing under, again, another acacia tree. And they're just hanging out, and there's, Mom acting like one of our cats at home. And then flamingos. We saw lots and lots of flamingos. So you can see that this is right at the edge of this lake, and you can see it's very narrow across, but it ran for maybe a good 2 miles in length. It was covered with flamingos the entire length, thousands and thousands and thousands of flamingos. And some more birds. There's the tawny eagle, a really big guy, and the marabou stork. A couple more from the antelope family, a topee, and there's a male eland. And then more lions. So we encountered this pride twice during the day, once in the morning and later in the afternoon, and they were on the move. There was the matriarch, some sisters, some cousins, and cubs. There were more than 24 lions in this pride. Here they are walking along and walking toward. That's the matriarch right there. And they were just cruising along and just kind of kept coming closer and closer to us, and then they decided to sit down under a tree or other things. So this one lioness, that's the vehicle right next to ours, and came over and decided to want to get some shade under the bumper and the tire, and just nestled down there for about 20 minutes and hung out. And then here's the male lion associated with the pride, and that poor guy, I told you about the poor male lions, he was about 50 yards away from the rest of the pride, off on his own, and at one point he started walking toward the pride and a couple of the other lions as they kind of growled at him, and he went back and went under the tree. And then hippos. So with due respect to Fiona and Fritz, that's a lot of hippos. I lost count at 75. They were everywhere. And there they are, the couple guys, squaring off, I think really having fun. But obviously they're laying there trying to stay wet. It was a fairly small pond with a lot of hippos, the result of which was a rather aromatic wafting in the air that is unforgettable. And then leopards. We did get to see a good leopard. So leopards tend to hunt solitary. They hunt at night as well. And they are extremely powerful. And they typically will take their prey and take it up a tree to keep it away from other predators. And a leopard can take a full-size wildebeest and take it up a tree. We saw the remains of a carcass of a wildebeest hanging from another tree a little earlier. And then these are granite domes. So these are populated throughout the Serengeti. So millions of years ago, when there was a lot of volcanic activity, there was a lot of magma trying to come up and spew, but didn't. So all this magma was underground, it cooled and formed granite. And then over the millennia, when there was all this other erosion, eroded away, but these granite domes remained. And they are great places for leopards and lions to raise their babies. And you can see, in addition to the granite domes, there's a lot of vegetation camouflage around. So here's a female lion there on top of a granite dome. There's a close-up of her. And she was protecting 4 cubs. The fourth one was way back there. You couldn't see him, but they were very cute. And they were hanging around in the underbrush. And so what will happen is that when a lioness is pregnant and she knows she's going to give birth, she will leave the pride and she will go to a place like this to have her cubs. And then she will wean them for 2-3 weeks or so, and then will bring them back into the fold, into the pride at that point. So talking about cheetahs and the hierarchy of predators. Now I said, the lions are at the top, and then the hyenas, and then the leopard, and the cheetahs are actually at the bottom of that list. The lions, the hyenas, and the leopards typically hunt at night, and they rule the night. So the cheetah is left to normally hunt during the day, and they will do that. But they are susceptible to having their prey stolen. So when a cheetah takes something down, they will eat as quick as they can before somebody tries to steal their mark. And this is exactly what happened. So this cheetah had taken down a zebra, and it was now about 50 yards away, or maybe less than 50 yards away from where the remaining carcass was. And here's what happened. So now you have a hyena, a jackal, and a vulture all waiting their turn to have a snack. So I'll end on this photo. This is back in Ngorongoro Crater. Off in the far distance, there's an alkaline lake. There are flamingos there, some other water birds. There's some hippos. And then all across the plain are all these herd animals. There's impala, there are gazelles, there's wildebeest, zebras, all grazing together. No one being bothered by each other. They're all kind of doing their own thing, and they're all kind of mixed in together. And then off on the periphery, you might see a lion or a hyena or a jackal, waiting for an opportunity to have a lunchtime snack. But this is kind of why we went to Africa, to see all of these magnificent animals existing in their natural order. This is how they exist and should exist. And it was just wonderful to see the expanse, not only of the landscape, but again, of all the animals there, existing in harmony. So with that, I'll give you your last two words in Swahili. Hakuna Matata. Hakuna Matata. No worries. They say that a lot. And then lastly, Asante. Thank you. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you might have about our adventure. Yes, Bob.
Okay, so as I understood your description, you were associating one male to a tribe.
Yes.
But tribes seem to be on the order of 10. So does that mean that the birth ratio is, 10 to 1 females, or does that mean there are a lot of unassociated males wandering around?
There are a number of unassociated males wandering around. The pride sizes vary. That first, I didn't show pictures. We saw another pride in Tarangire, and there were maybe 15 or 16 in that pride. There was no male around at all. That first pride in Ngorongoro, there was maybe a dozen. And then that last pride, there was at least 2 dozen. So that varies. But from what I was told, I think normally there's only one male hanging around with the pride at any one time, but they rotate in and out. So I'm not exactly sure the ratio, but as I said, the lifespan of the males is half of the females. So there's probably, less males, going around because there are many more females, obviously. Any other questions? Oh. There were a few. We saw some on the peripheries, but there weren't many there. We saw some like up the crater side. We encountered some. Tarangire, and there were quite a few elephants in Serengeti as well. And it was again, so many times, we would drive along maybe for 15 minutes and we're just looking at the scenery, and then boom, there's a herd of elephants. Oh my God, they're right there. They're very cool to see. Yes? The question is, were they introducing species that maybe were there in the past and aren't there now? I didn't get any information like that. The best of my knowledge, other than the fact that, some species are more endangered or there are less numbers than there were before, I think that these areas are pretty much letting nature be nature, so there isn't the imposition of man other than trying to protect from poaching. Now, one additional thing to that point, not about the species per se, but the biggest threat to the species at this point is not so much the killing off of animals, but it's the loss of a habitat, farming or other things that are going on. So right now, the Nature Conservancy has a campaign to try to acquire about 1 million acres of land in the surrounding areas around those parks to have protected contiguous areas, because we did see on occasion animals outside of the official park areas, and then they aren't necessarily protected or protected from a farmer who doesn't want a leopard to go after somebody or whatever. So they're trying to do that to try to make a bigger swath of land for protection. But 30% of Tanzania is protected already, so they're really trying to do the best they can to try to preserve the species. The other thing I'll say about the parks is that there are no fences, so animals can come and go, and they can do, it's their land, they can do whatever. So at a couple of the lodges that we stayed at, there's no fences around there, so animals can come and go however they please. So both in Tarangire and Serengeti, all the housing were individual pods, and the restaurant was a pod, and the check-in area was a pod, or whatever. And so at night, we would be escorted to and from our rooms, as a precaution. So the interesting story about that, we didn't encounter anything weird. We saw a few monkeys and the dik-diks and some birds. But at Serengeti, about 3 weeks before we were there, at night, around midnight, there was the night manager in the check-in area, and it's a separate pod, and there's 2 doorways, but there aren't doors. And all of a sudden, a leopard sauntered in to the night manager's area and then sauntered on out, and there you go. And it's not uncommon in Tarangire for elephants to stroll through the lodge area. I mean, it does happen. It didn't happen when we were there, but so, it's their land, and we're just visitors. Yes, Jen. What was our favorite park is the question. That's a tough one, though. I would say, I would probably say Ngorongoro Crater. That is a really special environment, just because it's so protected down in that crater, and there's so many animals there. It's really gorgeous. But each park really does have their own unique qualities. As far as our favorites, I I think I said that earlier. I could watch elephants, all day long. They're amazing. But I think Donna's favorite part of the trip was the Maasai village, which that was quite special to, engage, because the Maasai are doing what they have been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's been their way of life, and it was a privilege to be able to see how they are still successfully existing today. So okay. Well, with that, thank you again.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you all for coming. Be sure to follow us on Facebook to stay up to date on our events, and I'll be posting information out there soon. I want to thank our partner, Radio Artifact, for hosting us and providing this amazing atmosphere and for live streaming us, as well as our Urban Artifact for hosting us. Appreciate y'all being here, and looking forward to seeing more science later in the fall. Thanks.